Another ADHD girl guide, and this time we're going to be talking about diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think this is quite an interesting one for us to talk about because we both have quite different assessment journeys.
Mm,
So I went through NHS Right to Choose pathway, and you went through the private
private.
pathway. So it's good to have that different perspective of it. And I think as well, obviously, diagnosis is a big thing. People talking about like this overdiagnosis problem, blah blah, blah, which is not true. But then I also think on the other side, like we've spoken before, is I think that there is a lot of people out there who are self-diagnosing, and I don't want to sit here and say that a self-diagnosis is not valid, but I do think a self-diagnosis is more of like it's like the first step to a formal diagnosis, and I do think that a self-diagnosis can help you in a lot of ways. You know, having that realization of, oh, wait, was that ADHD the whole time? Can help you understand yourself. But I think a lot of the time that if you do just rely on a self-diagnosis, you're not really getting that expert diagnosis that you need. Like it might be that there's something else, and there's a load of things that overlap with ADHD and autism and a lot of other mental health conditions as well. And obviously, don't get me wrong, diagnosis is a privilege, and not everyone can get it because you either have to wait years on a waiting list or pay so much
Yeah.
money to get a diagnosis. But it's a difficult process to go through, especially if you are someone who's later on in life and you're just starting to figure things out. The system is broken.
Absolutely.
It's not straightforward. It is very difficult. So we're going to be talking a bit about what our assessment journey was like and some of the workarounds. And like our goal is not to convince you that you have ADHD or that you need to get a diagnosis or anything like that. But it's about sharing our own experiences throughout the process, so it makes you feel a little bit less lonely in it. Because if you are sat here and you're listening and you are thinking, maybe I have ADHD, maybe I should go seek a diagnosis, but you're scared and you're unsure of what the process is, that can be really lonely.
Yeah.
And being able to have an understanding of it and how it's different for the different pathways can hopefully help you feel a little less lonely and understand what to expect from it.
Yeah. And I also think a really important message that we want to reframe through this whole episode is that you never have to be ADHD enough to ask the question to get a diagnosis. I think when you read online about other people's experiences with ADHD, it might make you think that your experience isn't valid, or I don't have those symptoms, so I mustn't be ADHD. I think it's always worth going through that process and getting the answer, because even if it isn't ADHD, that person might be able to refer you to another psychiatrist for something different. So regardless of what it is you're struggling with, it's always worth going down, just finding the answer, even if it isn't ADHD. If you're slightly, if you're thinking maybe I might be, I think it's definitely worth going down that process. So we're going to go through some tips really on the diagnosis process. I would say tip number one, and something that I did. Obviously, I went private, so whether or not you're going private or going to your GP appointment, is to write everything down. So I remember just going through my notes and things will start coming to you as you start thinking about your childhood and thinking about things that you've done as an adult, and that are all kind of evidence. Because if they will ask you questions, whether you're in a GP appointment or whether you're going for private, they will ask you about your childhood. And sometimes in that moment, because our working memory isn't great, we often might forget things if we're a little bit nervous. So having things written down just to remind you of things that you might do. I'm late quite a lot. One of my themes was I always seem to be reorganizing my bedroom, my flat, and I've done that from a very young age. And thinking about those things that might seem a bit weird, that you've thought, that's a really weird thing that I do. writing those things down, because they're often the things that are actually signs that you might have ADHD.
Yeah, I think it's talking about your key struggles and not having them vague, you know, instead of saying, oh, I struggle to focus.
Yeah.
You know, give actual examples of, I've missed 3 work deadlines because I genuinely forgot about them, or, you know, I've reread the same page of this book over 10 times because I can't figure out what it said. And I think it's different, like, obviously Emily will speak about her experience private, and I'll speak about NHS Right to Choose. But I think more specifically for like NHS GP, if you're going to your GP in comparison to private where you pay for the time, your GP, you only have like a 5-10 minute appointment with them.
Yeah.
And they are seeing so many people that day that the more vague you are, the less likely you are going to be able to get what you want out of that appointment. And I'm very, very lucky that I have a very lovely GP who's very understanding. And I didn't even go to my GP with the concept of thinking that I had ADHD. I had a load of other mental health struggles. And I went to them with those struggles and couldn't understand why I was just so overwhelmed and couldn't process anything. And they were the one that first mentioned, oh, do you think you might have ADHD? And I didn't even think that would have been a thing. But if you have already done a lot of research and you've, you know, listened to podcasts, you've seen social media videos, you read online, and you really relate to a lot of those ADHD symptoms, and you know that you're struggling with it, the GP doesn't have time for you to waffle about it. They don't have any history of you, and, you know, I get it as a lot of the time whenever I go to the GP and they ask me, oh, so how are you? I'm like, yeah, I'm all right, thank you. You know, like, it's like you just forget instantly. And under pressure, you're not actually able to reliably create like a coherent history of what you're struggling with. So write it all down before you go. Write the specific thing, and it's not about over preparing. You know, if you had any other sort of medical appointment, if it was for something physical that you had problems with, you'd do exactly the same. So treat your ADHD symptoms as you would do with any other medical issue. If you went to the doctor because you had stomach pains, you'd sit there and you said, you know, I couldn't eat this because of my stomach pains and I had these really bad cramps and things like that. Do exactly the same with your ADHD, because I know there's a lot of stigma around going to the doctor for mental health conditions, but treat it exactly the same as you would a physical condition.
Yeah, definitely.
Tip number 2 is asking for the referral by name. I think this probably relates more to NHS than
100%,
to private. I think a lot of the time is we struggle to advocate for ourselves, and especially if you have ADHD or you think you have ADHD, there is a lot of self-doubt that comes with it. And I know that when I first went for my diagnosis, there was a lot of self-doubt of thinking, you know, I'm just being overdramatic, I don't have ADHD. And so if I would have gone into my appointment with my GP and would have said, I think I've got ADHD, and they would have gone, no, I don't think you do, I would have gone, all right then, and I would have walked out of the room and that would have been it. But luckily I didn't have a GP who was like that. But not all GPs are the same. And so you shouldn't have to wait for a referral to be offered.
Yeah.
Because if you wait for a referral to be offered, they're not always going to give it to you, because they've got a lot of stuff on. You know, there is so many people they see in a day that it's not possible for them to be able to give their full attention to one person. And I know it is horrible, but it is just the reality of the NHS.
Yeah.
Of, like, if you put yourself in a GP's shoes and you're seeing over 100 people, 5 minutes appointments each time, you know, it's physically not possible to be able to do that. So like I said before, of being able to ask for what you want, especially if you haven't heard of a right to choose pathway. The right to choose pathway is basically a pathway in the UK, which means you can ask your GP to be referred to a private service, and the NHS will cover the cost of your assessment.
Yeah.
And when I first got referred through the right to choose, it was very early on when the right to choose began. There was only like 2 private providers on the right to choose pathway. And so the wait lists were very, very long because it was quite new. Whereas now, I've had friends who have gone to the GP like 6 weeks ago and have already been had their appointment with their
Yeah.
right to choose provider. Because there's so many more private providers coming onto the right to choose contracts that there's so much choice now of who you can choose. So what I would do personally, if you are going to your NHS GP and you want a referral, is have a look at it. Have a look at the right to choose pathway. If you go on the ADHD UK website, there is a list of all the right to choose providers, and you can have a look at who has the longest wait times, and choose whatever one you think looks good. Read the reviews of them. Like, are they trusted? Do they look like they give you a comprehensive assessment, and does it feel right? And physically request that right to choose from your GP, because if you go in there with the idea of saying, I want to be referred for an ADHD assessment, rather than saying, oh, I think something might be wrong, or I've been struggling lately, it's direct, it's specific, and it gives the GP something to do. Rather than have to solve a problem and figure out what's wrong with you, you go to them and you say, I think I have ADHD, this is what I need you to do for me. And that's a lot easier of a problem for them to solve than it is than you going into their office and going, I don't know what's wrong with me.
Yeah, because they're also not trained, a lot of GPs,
No.
to really understand ADHD. So you need to actually be, I mean, I didn't obviously do this myself, but you need to be really adamant that you want to get referred for ADHD, because they're not trained to look for it. Obviously, they might have a tick box. It's like when you go in, I remember before when I had a tick box, you know, you've got depression, but they're just looking for the common signs and symptoms. Oh yeah, you tick like 5 of those, so you must be depressed. But it's not within their favor often. So yeah, you definitely have to push for it. So Megan's kind of touched on this already, and obviously I didn't do this personally because I didn't do right to choose. But finding out your actual local wait times before you assume anything. Obviously, some people, I know my friends have done this. They avoid going to get a referral from the GP and going down the right to choose pathway because they've heard that it takes years. And like Megan said, it used to, but now we have more providers. Actually, wait times are different for each provider, and there's more options than there ever has been. So as of 2026, the standard NHS pathway is widely reported at 2 to 5 years in many areas, which seems crazy. Some regions 5 to 8 years. While the right to choose where your GP refers you, which is obviously the right to choose pathway, is typically faster and around 8 to 15 months, 3 major providers. And although have ICBs paused and capped new referrals now?
I think it depends on your area. I mean, obviously we're sat here, we're speaking about it, we're not medical professionals. I mean, just based off of what I know, I would check in your local area.
Yeah.
Because certain councils will have paused on doing as many, but it's worth checking in your area and not letting it put you off. And also, I've said it to multiple people who are thinking about an assessment. You're so much better being on a wait list than you are not being on one. And it's like, yes, even if you think, oh yeah, it's going to take years to get
But
on
it might
this,
not as well.
It might not. Like if you look at some of the wait list times, some of the providers are like 6 weeks, which is crazy fast. And a lot of people might put off getting an assessment because they think it costs so much money, and oh, I either have to wait years or I need to pay thousands, and it's not necessarily those two. And you're sat here considering the fact that you might have ADHD anyway. What's the difference between being put on a wait list and considering the fact that you have ADHD, and then, you know, in a few months' time or a year's time, you finally get that assessment, because that time is going by either way. So you might as well be on the wait list if you genuinely think that you do have it.
I think that's hard though, anyway, because if there's people with ADHD, probably I know for me, it'd be like, oh, well, there's no point, I can't be bothered, I'm not going to go through it because it seems too much faff, don't want to wait, want it now, impulsivity, need the answers immediately. But yeah, it's definitely a case of short-term pain, long-term gain, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and it does feel like ages when you're on the waiting list. Like, I remember having my first appointment with my GP, and being referred to it and thinking, okay, well, this is it now, and then going to this loophole of researching ADHD and being like, oh my god, why have I never considered this? And then taking like over a year to actually have my assessment, and like having all this build up and this anxiety around it, and then having the assessment and having it being like, okay, I've now been assessed with ADHD, what now? Okay, we're going to put you on a wait list to start titration for medication. Okay, fine. Another year waiting to start titration.
Wow.
And it feels like a lot of waiting, but like I said, this was a few years ago, and this was when there wasn't as many providers, and there is a lot more providers now. So yeah, don't let all the talk of the long wait list put you off, because dependent on where you are, there might be a right to choose provider who can see you quite quickly.
Yeah.
Tip number 4, cover every area of your life, not just one. We mentioned this before, but instead of just going into your GP and mentioning just one struggle, like, it's so easy to write off one struggle, and it's so easy to say that it could be something else. You know, if I went into my GP and said, I keep crying because I'm just so overwhelmed, that's so easy to say, oh, it's depression, it's anxiety. And GPs are not trained to look at one incident. Like, they need to be able to see a pattern. So if we go back to tip 1, where you're writing your list and you're talking about all the symptoms and all your struggles that you think are ADHD, cover every aspect of your life, not just one. Don't just sit there and talk about how you struggle with work, because if you go into your GP and you just talk about, oh, well, I really struggle to my work and nothing else, then maybe the problem is your work. It's not ADHD. Whereas if you can go in and you can go, oh, I struggle with my work, my relationships, my home, my money, and you talk about your childhood and you talk about all these incidents in every single aspect of your life, then that is a pattern. And that's the difference between ADHD and a lot of other problems like stress and relationship problems, is that it is going to be a constant in every single aspect of your life. And that's what you need to be able to show to your GP, is that, look, it's happening in every aspect.
Yeah.
There must be a pattern here.
Yeah, I think I remember splitting it. I remember doing like relationships, work, and just bullet pointing in each. It's crazy when you start actually doing that exercise that you start realising, oh my God, there are points within each of these, and it starts going from, oh, there's loads in work, oh, there's actually quite a lot of relationships. So yeah, that's definitely really important. And sort of moving into tip 5, which is linked to this as well, is bringing in evidence from your past. Interestingly, with ADHD, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I think it's also trauma related. I don't remember a lot of my childhood. And looking back to my childhood can sometimes be quite difficult because I don't actually remember a lot of it. But I've brought it up quite a few times. I remember from a very young age rearranging my room all the time. And if you think back to your childhood and think of maybe these little things that you remember that were very common, whether it's, you know, some of the examples here, maybe if you have old school reports, or asking your parents, if you have a relationship with your parents, you can have that conversation. Are there any things in your childhood that really stand out to you about my behaviour that you think were quite strange or different to other children? Childhood friends, siblings can sometimes really help to give you that overall picture of childhood, because that is going to be taken into account when you get assessed. They look at how you behaved in childhood, and I think that actually is a factor of whether or not you get diagnosed, isn't it?
ADHD is categorized as a neurodevelopmental condition, and for any neurodevelopmental condition like autism, your symptoms need to be present throughout your childhood. So if you don't have any symptoms throughout childhood, then you won't be assessed. And so being able to prove that these symptoms are there throughout your childhood is so important, to show that you've struggled with this throughout your whole life, and it's not just a case of the situation that you're in. And like you said earlier, is, you know, memory of childhood can be difficult. I'm only 28, and I generally don't think that I can remember anything like before the age of like 7 or 8. Or it's all a bit shaky, and I can't really remember it that well. And it can be difficult, you know, asking parents, because I remember when I got my assessment, I didn't ask any of my parents, either of my parents, to provide any evidence because one, they don't really have a good understanding of ADHD, and they would have told me that I was being ridiculous if I was going for an ADHD assessment. They would have been like, "You're stupid, you don't have it, why are you bothering?" And two, because I had quite an unstable childhood, because I was in with different family members and things like that. I didn't have a stable caregiver to be able to
give a really good representation of who you are.
Representation of it. So it's not always easy, and you know what, it's not always going to be straightforward of being able to get things from your childhood. You know, if you have older parents who can't remember as well, or if you don't have that much from your childhood that you remember, just bring that as part of your evidence. I would say is like, if you don't have childhood friends, is there a reason that you don't have childhood friends who don't remember you? Is it because you struggled with friendships when you were younger? Anything that you can remember from your childhood will help you and support your case that the pattern goes back even further than just what you can articulate in that present moment.
Yeah, definitely.
Tip number 6, know what the titration weight is before it blindsides you. I mean, I spoke about this a bit earlier in terms of knowing what your local wait times are. And a lot of people don't realise this. Yes, there is a wait list for an assessment. There is also a wait list for medication. And I'm not saying that medication is the end goal for everyone, because it's not. But if you are going into diagnosis with the idea that you would like to try medication to help with your symptoms, diagnosis is not really the finish line in that process. You'll get a hit with a second separate wait for medication that no one actually warned me about. I didn't even know about it. I knew that I was going to have a wait list for a diagnosis. I didn't even expect that the wait list for titration would be just as long.
Yeah.
And it's almost harder, that wait time of waiting for the medication, because I've now been given the answer of, okay, you have ADHD, we're going to try you on medication. I'm getting like really excited that there's going to be something that might be able to help, and then it's like, oh, another month goes by, still haven't got in contact, looking on Reddit of like how long the wait list is, and like a whole another year, and you're just like, it takes fucking ages, and it feels like even longer than the actual assessment does, because you've had your answer now, and now you're waiting for that support. That is so difficult. But on the flip side of it is, I don't have to pay for any of my ADHD medication, whereas you do, and that is a lot of money to be spending on it.
Yeah, it is. And also, I think one of the things that I would add to that is that just because you start with a medication, it doesn't necessarily mean that will be the medication that you'll be on. Yeah. Like, I've gone from Concerta, now I'm on Elvans, I still don't actually think that's right for me. And then that's another titration process potentially. So each time you go up a dose, that's another titration. You know, everything is controlled. I thought, oh, I'm just going to try this medication, it's going to change my life, and that's it. In actual fact, it's going to take a lot longer, and I think it might take, from being diagnosed in January, it's probably going to be, I think, towards the end of the year that I actually find the medication that is right for me.
Yeah.
So that's actually quite a long time when you think about it. And it's very, very expensive going private, and obviously you can apply for the shared care, is it? But you have to also,
GPs are refusing the shared
care. And you also have to have been on the same medication for X amount of time. So although private was a quicker route and got me the answer quicker, it's very, very expensive. I got charged £60 for an email the other day. An email.
That's insane.
And I actually sent an email today to my psychiatrist just to explain that I think that my current medication is intensifying my OCD symptoms, which I've now learned is very common if you have both OCD and ADHD. And I actually put in the email, I would really like a response on how to resolve this without having to pay £60 for a response, because it's so ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
Like, you think you spend all that money, and then I got an email back, and it was like, so you will have to pay £60 for this response. And it's like, what?
Is there not like a cheaper provider?
Probably. I think I need to consider that.
I will say, though, the difference is that with private, you definitely get more flexibility with it, because you are paying for it. So say, for example, for me, my titration period was 12 weeks, and I only tried 2 different medications, and obviously they upped my dose and things. But now that I'm out of the titration period, I can't change my medication that I'm on. Can't change my medication that I'm on. Can't change my dose. Can't do any of that. And if I want to do that, then I have to get assessed again.
Really?
I can't go back to it. So I will now get a yearly review of it.
Right.
I don't even know how long it's been. I don't know if it's been a year. It feels like it's been over a year. So surely the yearly review should be coming up at some point. But I can't change it unless I go through this whole titration process again, which there isn't any of that flexibility. Like, I don't have anyone that I could just send an email to and be like, actually, I don't think I'm enjoying this as much.
True.
Like, I remember sending an email to my prescriber and was like, is there any way that I can get a higher dose just like the week before I'm due on my period? Because I feel like that will help me, because my medication doesn't work as well the week before. And I know a lot of people who just go, like, have an extra boost that week before. Didn't get a response. Just got my prescription sent, and it was the same one as before. But
interesting to hear that.
I also don't have to pay £60 for an email. So it's one of those ones, I think, if you have the money to do it, then you probably will have a far better experience, an enjoyable experience. But I would also say, I don't actually know if this tip is on here, but I'm going to add this tip on here, is that if you are going through Right to Choose, or if you are thinking about getting a private diagnosis, double check with your GP about shared care before you do it. Because there are a lot of GPs who just point blank say no to a shared care agreement, whereas a lot of GPs do. And I think it's just worth checking that if your GP will accept shared care before you go through with it. If you are willing to pay all the prescription costs for your medication, then fine. If you are someone who you think that you're not going to be able to afford that, and you would like to be able to have the NHS to cover your prescription costs, then it is definitely worth checking with your GP if they will beforehand. Because I just assumed that because my GP referred me for an ADHD assessment, of course they'd accept shared care, because they were the ones that referred me. And then as soon as I got a diagnosis and they want to put me on medication, my GP declines shared care. And it's just because the NHS, well, certain NHS trusts don't have the facilities, they don't have the people or anything to be able to, keep an eye on it. And so for them, the easiest thing to do is to decline it. Which is completely understandable, but also very frustrating if you're someone who wants to get your prescription through the NHS. So always worth double checking.
Yeah, wish I'd done that. So tip number 7, prepare for what the assessment actually involves. So I think either people think it's going to be a really quick chat, or on the other hand, it's an intimidating exam, and it's neither of those things. So I think going in with the wrong expectations can make it feel far worse than what it actually needs to be. But also equally, being prepared for what it is really important, because there are different questionnaires that you have to do beforehand, and you also have to have somebody there who has known you for, is it 8 years? No, not 8 years.
It's like someone who's known you throughout your childhood.
Yeah. So making sure that you have someone as well who would be happy enough to be on that call with you. For me, going private, my mum was actually on the call, whereas I know that other people, they had a separate conversation or with that person who's known them through childhood. So I don't know if it works differently.
I never had that. I had loads of questionnaires.
Yeah, I had the questionnaires.
I had an informant do a questionnaire, but obviously because I haven't really had someone stable throughout my childhood, I got my boyfriend to fill out the questionnaire as my informant, and I only had one interview with the psychiatrist, which was the assessment, and they didn't have an interview with an informant or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think it is really dependent on the provider
how they want to do it
is and how they want to do it. And I think it is very much dependent on your situation. Like, for me, I think them having an understanding of that there hasn't really been anyone who's been there consistently throughout to be able to give a clear picture of my childhood is really difficult to be able to get someone like that. So they have enough evidence that they need to be able to give a diagnosis without that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have your own perspective of things, and that does not give a clear enough picture of whether a diagnosis is needed or not, then they may need an informant as well. But it is very different on you, your situation, your provider. And I also just think it's like not something to be nervous about. I think I went into my assessment being really nervous and scared of it, or like whether I was going to say the wrong thing, or whether I needed to prepare something for it. These are experts in doing
They'll
ADHD
be able to
assessments.
pick this up very easily
there's no,
if you have it.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. It's literally like a conversation talking about your childhood and your struggles, and they will ask the questions and you need to answer. You do not need to lead the conversation. So there's not anything that you need to prepare. You just need to answer the questions truthfully. Tip 8 is find community while you wait. Like we said before, is the problem with a lot of the diagnosis process is with the wait list, and you know, whether you have to wait months or years, it is a really isolating time, and especially if you feel like there's no one that understands you or understands what you're going through. Going through the process of thinking that you have ADHD reframes your whole entire life. It changes how you see yourself, how it sees your childhood, how you react to different things. Like, I genuinely think the whole assessment process was life-changing for me, and discovering more about ADHD and how that actually impacted me. And that's a massive thing to go through when you're by yourself. It's huge. So being able to find that community, whether that's online ADHD communities, if you are a woman or a girl with ADHD, find one that's specific to that. If you have other struggles as well, if you're a mother, if you are going through menopause, find those communities that are specific to you, so you really find those people that relate to you, so you don't feel like you're going through this by yourself. And that can help you through that wait. Like, I didn't have anyone when I was going through that waiting time. And I had a lot of people, anytime I told someone I was going for an assessment for ADHD, they'd be like, "Are you serious? You don't have ADHD? Like, why would you think that?" That added to that self-doubt. Whereas if I would have had those communities of people who would have actually understood what I was going through, it would have been easier. The time would have flown by. So thinking of it as that it can help you while you wait, not as a substitute for diagnosis, but more as a place of like, wait, is this what you mean too? And other people who are living through it help you go through it, and it makes you feel like you're not alone. It's like a little waiting room with people that are all suffering with the same thing.
Which is so important. And hopefully our podcast is that for some people. Tip number 9 is, I think, actually one of the most important points here, that once you get the diagnosis, what actually changes and what doesn't. And I think it's you feel like when you get the diagnosis, it's going to be this, oh my God, light bulb reaction, I've got the diagnosis, my whole life's going to change. But there's a lot of feelings that come with the diagnosis that I don't think you actually expect. And one of the biggest ones for me has been grief. And I know that we've spoken about this before on the podcast, but there is a lot of grief for your younger self, and thinking, you know, if I'd got this diagnosis earlier, how might my life have been? You know, a certain amount of anger, I think, for all the times that people told you were too much and that you were ignored, and that you knew something was wrong with you, but you didn't quite understand what it was, and now you have a label for it. So whilst getting a diagnosis can be life-changing, and it is life-changing, and it's also really important to recognise that there are a lot of emotions that will come up with that, and that doesn't mean that you don't need to work on anything anymore. You can still be a bit unmotivated, and that not be linked to ADHD, and it not making it an answer to everything. There is still work to do after that diagnosis, which is actually a bit fucking annoying if you've gone through the right to choose process, where you're like, right, okay, I've just waited 2 years, just got my diagnosis on the medication, and I actually still have work to do.
It's like, oh fuck, I've got childhood trauma on top of
yes,
that. Oh my God, it's
exactly. I've got to get an ADHD coach because my medication's not enough. And I think that's just really important, just to handle those expectations, Because whilst diagnosis is, it's great and it's a very, very important part of the puzzle, it's just one part of the puzzle.
I think something as well that people don't really speak about as much, which I really struggled with after I got my diagnosis of ADHD, was regression. And I never really thought about it until recently. But, you know, going your whole entire life masking and pretending that you are someone that you are not, and then getting an ADHD diagnosis and finally accepting yourself for who you are is amazing. But also I found that I struggled with my ADHD symptoms a lot more after I got my diagnosis than I did before, because I had an answer for it, because I knew that I was more accepting of myself. I allowed the mask to drop. I allowed myself to be myself. And I was like, oh, well, now I'm on the train and I'm really feeling really overstimulated by all these people. Oh, it's because my ADHD. And it was almost that regression of like, I was able to be myself and I didn't have to put a mask on. But fuck, I was like, I felt so much more neurodivergent than I ever did before.
So interesting. Absolutely. I feel like that's such a thing. And also the imposter syndrome that comes with it of like, do I actually, I remember I got diagnosed and I was like, maybe I don't. Did he actually just diagnose me? I had to think about, maybe he just wants money. Maybe he just wants my money. Maybe he just wants me to pay for medication and pay for his time, but I don't actually have ADHD. And I think you can really have that, you know, I'm not hyperactive enough. You know, you compare yourself to someone else. And that's definitely a big part. And that can mean that you don't speak up when you need to.
I remember thinking that I convinced my psychiatrist into thinking that I had ADHD. Like, I thought I had manipulated him. Like, I had researched ADHD so much that I knew exactly what to say. And I was like, I wasn't that bothered either way if I got a diagnosis, because I was just like, okay, well, we'll see if this is what it is. So there was no way that I went into that assessment thinking, well, I'm going to say exactly the right things so they give me assessment. And also, these people are experts. They know what they're doing. So
they're not just going to diagnose you for the sake of diagnosing you.
Yeah, what do they gain out of giving you a diagnosis? I mean, private, obviously, they get money, but these are also people who are highly regulated and have gone through years of medical training. I'm sorry, a random person who just wants some medication.
Yeah, they're probably not going to do that. I'd be a bit sick, twisted person to do that.
Yeah, definitely. The last tip number 10, is what we'd tell our younger self, or advice for someone else starting the process. And I think this is important because, you know, we have our own experiences of this, and I think that if I was speaking to myself when I started the process, or speaking to someone who's listening to this who is considering starting the process, I spent so much of my life thinking that there was something wrong with me, that I was lazy, that I was too much, that I wasn't trying hard enough. I went through parents' evenings of being told that you're really, really clever, you just don't apply yourself, and just constantly not understanding why life was so much harder for me in comparison to all my friends, and why everyone else seemed to be able to breeze by and I couldn't. And I didn't understand why everything was so much more difficult. And I think if I would have given myself the permission to have grace, to, you know, to be nicer to myself, because I am now that I've got my diagnosis, then I would in a heartbeat. Like, if I would go back to like 13-year-old me and would have had an understanding if I have ADHD and I could be nicer to myself.
Oh my gosh, definitely.
Then I would do that, because there was so much shit that I went through and I felt so shit about myself because I didn't know what was wrong with me. Whereas if I would have known that I had ADHD a bit earlier on in life, then maybe I wouldn't have been so hard on myself. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that a diagnosis has given me, is being able to be nicer to myself and have a little bit more of an understanding. And so if you're thinking about going through the process and you're unsure of whether it's the right thing, I usually think if you're sat here listening to this podcast and you're sat there thinking about whether you have ADHD, you probably have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I was to say something to my younger self, it would probably be that you deserve to have the answers to what it is that you're struggling with. Because, I think, you're fine. You're told so much. Oh, you don't have anything. You're fine. You're just a bit emotional. You're just a bit, you're just a bit sensitive. And no, if something is impacting your day-to-day life that much, that there is something wrong with you. And don't let anyone tell you or make you feel like you don't deserve to get the answers, because you do deserve to get the answers, whether it's an ADHD diagnosis, whatever it might be. You deserve to understand your brain and to get the right support for you.
Definitely. And I think, like I said before, if it was a physical condition, if I was walking around bleeding out of my eyes every single day,
that would be terrifying.
People would go, Megan, go to the doctor. Why have you not gone to the doctor yet? But because you can't see ADHD, because it's not tangible, you think it's all in your head. And yes, it is in your brain, but that doesn't mean that it's not a condition. It is real. It is real to you. And if it affects you on a daily basis, just because you're not walking around bleeding out your eyes, doesn't mean that you don't need to go to the doctor. Try and reframe it. Think of it as a physical condition rather than just something that's all in your head. And if you have your parents or your family or your friends and they're thinking, oh, well, you don't have ADHD, they're not in your brain, so don't listen to them. If you think that you have it, the question is always worth asking. If you go for an assessment and they tell you you don't have ADHD, then you don't have ADHD. There you go. You have an answer.
Yeah.
It's better than sat there pondering about something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope these tips have helped. And obviously, we're not medical professionals by any means. I do hope that some of these tips might be able to point you in the right direction if you do go on that process, whether it is right to choose or private.